and welcome to another episode of the Meal Prep Monday podcast. I'm your host and founder of Prep Dish, Allison Schaaf. In today's episode, I am interviewing Dr. Austin Lake, and we are talking about getting to the root of health issues. We kind of go all over the place in this episode. It is really interesting to hear more about the why behind healthy eating, and also getting to hear a little bit more about how he uses Prep Dish with his family and clients, and just excited for you to listen in today. Before we get into today's episode, I do have an email to read from Prep Dish customer Zara. Zara writes, "Prep Dish has changed my life for the better. I used to only cook the handful of things I knew how. Now I feel confident cooking new and interesting meals without compromising how healthy the food is." Zara, thank you so much for sharing, and I'm glad to hear that Prep Dish has positively impacted your eating at your household. If you're listening to this and you have not tried our meal plans, we do have a 2-week free trial set up at prepdish.com/MPM, short for Meal Prep Monday. That is linked in the show notes, but it's 14 days free of the meal plans. You get access to all of our, different paleo, gluten-free, low carb, the super fast, which are just family-friendly meals. But you get access to all those. You can try it out for 2 weeks and just see how it works for you and your family. Okay, that's all. Let's go ahead and jump into today's episode. Well, welcome, Dr. Austin Lake. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. How are you?
Like I was telling you in the open, I'm coming in hot this morning. I've had a lot of things going on, but doing pretty well.
Well, glad to have you here. I'm really excited to talk today about women's health and the work that you do. Before we get into that, could you just give the listeners a brief background on who you are and, what you do?
Yeah. I always tell people that, I don't consider myself to be an expert in any one thing. I think what I've always tried to do for clients is try to take the information that I've learned and that I've been exposed to and just my experience and seeing what's worked for women, and try to boil it down into a very simple and concise way that they can take it and implement it. And we like to help them with that implementation as well, but just help them to implement information that we know is true. And then, I think from there you start to become empowered. You start to realize what you can do to affect your health in a positive way. And that's always been my method. But what I practice is functional medicine. And for those who don't know, it's really just using your body's quirks. Like every body has quirks, and every body has specific needs. And I think there are needs that are foundational to all humans, and then there are nuances and adjustments that need to be made depending on what the person's going through. And so functional medicine really likes to analyze all those different factors as much as we can, whether it's through testing or just question and answering or assessments. But it's really just trying to help to be a consultant to somebody so that they can then make an empowered, informed decisions on how to better their health. And so that's where I like to start. But my doctorate was actually in physical therapy, believe it or not. And it was, 8 years ago or so when I got that done. And then I did functional medicine like in 3 years on top of that. And that's really where all the pieces kind of came together for me. So I'm not a physician, not prescribing medications, which has been an advantage for me. Actually, my business partner, he is a physician, and he does do that, but he doesn't even use medications anymore. Like we do everything naturally, and it's trying to meet the client where they are. And I think when you have this option of medication, I think sometimes people rely on it too much. And I think if you don't have the ability to use medications, you have to get crafty. You have to start figuring out what's going on. You have to look at the root causes, and it really forces you to dive in. And that's where food is so important. So I'm excited to talk about some options that we've used, including your product.
Great. Well, before we get into that, can you just give me a little bit of an overview? Like, what are some of the most common issues that you're seeing and that you're dealing with in your practice?
Oh man, autoimmunity is crazy. It's been blowing up for the last 20, 30 years, but even the last 5 years, it's exponential. How many clients we have coming in that, whether they realize it or not, they're having autoimmune issues. So autoimmunity, that then leads into a lot of issues with thyroid health. And then that then leads into a lot of issues with adrenal glands, and that leads into issues with sex hormones. And so we usually see kind of that cascade or that axis of problems that a lot of women are dealing with. When you have a majority of the population on levothyroxine, and they're dealing with chronic pain, chronic fatigue, and they have 80% of women are having hormonal issues, you start seeing pretty quickly how all these things are connected and how women are, um, you know, proportionately more affected than men. And it's like 3 to 5 times more likely to have autoimmune issues and, a lot more likely to have issues with hormones, obviously, because there's so much fluctuation each month versus a man who's pretty stable. And so, we work with women primarily for that reason, just because there's a little bit more complexity there and it requires a little bit more nuance, a little bit more time. And at least when I was first getting into women's health, which was never my plan, I was interested in sports. As a most 20-year-old men are, like, that was kind of my focus. And then as life kind of went on and God kind of showed me more, like, women need help and they're not getting the help they need. And they're all going through a very similar process that when you really boil it down and look at kind of the commonalities between what's driving a lot of these issues, you see it's related to their food, it's related to the things they're putting on their body, the things that are surrounding them in their air and their water. It's the poor sleep because they're taking care of everybody else except for themselves, and so they don't really get much sleep too often. Maybe you have babies and you have poor circadian rhythm, and next thing you know, you start having issues with your cravings in the morning, and then you start relying more on caffeine, and it just kind of cascades on all these different problems that can be fixed, and we do help people fix, but you have to kind of have a plan in place, and you have to know that it's even possible. But a lot of women don't know it's possible to fix it.
I have to laugh a little bit. We have three, and one of them is one, and he's usually pretty good at night. But yeah, last night it was like, I don't know, something happened. He was off.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh yeah, that circadian rhythm.
Yeah, kids are crazy like that.
I know they like to keep you on your toes.
Yeah.
Always a Sunday night, right before Monday, right before the
Yeah,
weekend.
right before you need to be energized, they like to disrupt your life. But that's
Exactly.
they are your life, so it's all right.
Yes. So going back to these issues, so when it comes to the diet or even lifestyle, are you seeing that there's kind of this like overarching things you're recommending, or is it all like nuanced or what?
No, for sure. There's like I said, there's core tenets that need to be addressed.
Mhm.
I think there's four things I typically recommend to most women. It's a high quality omega 3. Omega 3 supplements need to be um, coming from a good source. And so usually, I like brands that, they're in a nice dark bottle. They don't go rancid. They probably need to be stored in some kind of refrigeration of some kind.
Mhm.
They should have an EPA value of 600 milligrams per dose, a DHA of 600 milligrams per dose. You need to be taking it with food. Those are all things that are pretty standard. And
Mhm.
if you're getting a cheap version of that, or you're missing some of those criteria, like it may not be potentially harmful, but it definitely won't be helpful. And so that's one that I always recommend. A B complex, a methylated B complex, is usually what I recommend for most people. Most women have issues with MTHFR. I should say most, but like 60% have issues with MTHFR. And so ensuring that you are methylating, and methylation is
Mhm.
this process of, cleaning up bad DNA, make sure you're making energy, detoxifying. All those things are so vitally important. But when you have a diet that's full of folic acid and you're getting this synthetic form of folate and you have MTHFR, or you don't methylate well, you're going to be feeling, more likely to be anxious, depressed. You're going to have more issues with detoxification, probably more issues with your menstrual cycle. And so folic acid is on a lot of carbohydrate type foods. And so cutting those types of things out is vitally important for everybody, I think, not just people that have MTHFR, but especially if you have MTHFR. And then if you're pregnant and you're taking a prenatal that has folic acid in it, all the doctors say you need to have folic acid to prevent, these birth defects. Well, if you're taking folic acid, what you'll know is that you start building up that toxicity in your system. And then when you start to get it out of that and you're no longer on that prenatal, you'll start feeling pretty crazy, because like it can create this issue with detoxification that you start having to kind of recover from that after your postpartum. And I think a lot
Mhm.
of women don't understand that. So that's a big one. Making sure you get proper levels of folate and B vitamins is something I always recommend. Obviously, vitamin D3 of K2. That's pretty hot topic. All these things are pretty hot topics, rightfully so, because they make a big difference. But having sufficient levels of vitamin D3, again, you want to be over 65 with your reference range. Typically, is what I recommend. A lot of uh, from a clinical perspective, the clinical reference range is from 30 to 100, but 30 is drastically low. If you're in the below 30 or even below 50, you're going to start having side effects from that. And so we want to make sure your vitamin D levels are nice and sufficient. K2 is obviously important because it helps to keep that calcium in your cells and help that vitamin D to actually convert and to stay in its active form. So it can help to contribute things like your cholesterol, so they can help to contribute to your hormones and contribute to your inflammation, contribute to your immune system, energy, all that stuff. So it's super important, vitamin D3 with K2. And then lastly, it's going to be magnesium glycinate is my favorite type of magnesium. It's jack of all trades. But you can
Mhm.
also take magnesium L-threonate. It's really helpful for racing mind, brain fog, all that kind of stuff. Magnesium citrates can be more helpful for constipation if you're having that issue. But there's a lot of different things you can kind of look at depending on that. But I think if you're wanting just to get a solid, sufficient dose of magnesium, glycinate's a really good option. Taking it before bed, about an hour before bed, is really useful for sleep, for calming your body, for helping with sugar imbalances, cortisol. It's really a good jack of all trades. So those are typically the four things I recommend as like kind of a foundational pillar for most women.
I'm a big fan of magnesium as well, or all of those. I want
Yeah.
to go back to something you said. You mentioned recommending people cutting back on refined carbs specifically because of the folic acid. So,
Mm.
can you talk a little bit more on that?
Yeah. So a lot of these like quote unquote processed foods that we
Mhm.
consume, that's kind of what the processing is. Like when they're fortified with folic acid, or they have bromide in them, or they have, they're sprayed with pesticides, herbicides like glyphosate, all that stuff, like all that. What that really boils down to, for people who are like, well, why does organic matter? Why does non-GMO matter? Like, why does cutting out refined carbohydrates matter? Is like, well, if you're like making your own bread, if it's like sourdough bread, and you're getting you're harvesting it in a way that's like that was truly the way that God intended to be harvested, and you're actually growing the grain and all that, like that can be a useful thing to consume, right? Like that's not what
Mhm.
I'm talking about. Like I'm talking about the refined foods that have been processed, and they have added chemicals, they had this added process that's accelerating their ability to produce them, or produce them in a way that doesn't have the competition with like weeds and other crops that would be kind of choking out their production as far as their yield goes. That's really why they have glyphosate and they have GMOs, because if they don't genetically modify a food that we are then consuming, they cannot spray something like an herbicide on it without it killing also the crop. And so they have to kill the weed and not kill the crop. And by doing that, they genetically modify our food to where we're eating things that are no longer what God created them to be. And so they're coming into our system. Our systems identify them as a foreign invader. It goes on and creates an antibody that then goes on and attacks it. So every time you're eating something, it goes after that particular thing. And those particular things can get trapped in your thyroid, and they can get trapped in different parts of your tissue to where your body is then going after good tissue and causing it autoimmune responses. And so that's a problem if you're consuming these foods long term. And that's why there's some things about your meal prep that I really like, that like AIP is my favorite kind of way to go about this, because it allows you to cut out a lot of these things that you don't really have to think about. You don't have to be like, oh, is this full of folic acid, or is this going to be okay? It's like, no, you're just cutting out these foods that are normally sprayed, that are normally, contaminated, that are normally going to be causing your immune system problems. And that's why, if you follow autoimmune protocol, you just kind of give yourself a really good starting point, and you can eat more foods that are not going to contribute to the problem, but help to solve the problem long term. So yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's kind of
No, it does. It does.
fun.
'Cause I just think it's interesting of like, I think there's been all this focus on gluten, which I'm not saying that gluten's good, but I think sometimes it's not that easy of an answer. And maybe it's like
Right.
cutting that out, like what all, realizing there's other things that you're doing when you're removing certain foods, and that maybe it's other things too that are not helping.
Yeah, no, and there's this process known as cross reactivity. Like you can have this molecular mimicry thing
Mhm.
occur, and what that really means is you can have something like gliadin protein from gluten, and it can stimulate a similar response from your immune system's perspective, that again that goes after and attacks it because it thinks it's something that it's not. And I think if you're eating foods like whether you're celiac or not, like if you are eating gluten that is highly processed, not only are you not getting, so I know this is a bit of a tangent, but like there's this shikimate pathway within foods, like in plants, that they produce these things called alkaloids, and alkaloids are very helpful for fighting inflammation, having this antioxidant effect, and providing your body with these hidden gems of nutrition that we don't usually talk about, but we get them through food. But if you have something that's been sprayed, it eliminates that shikimate pathway to where you don't get those benefits, right? And so one this is kind of another tangent, but like one of the main components of a chemotherapy drug that they use is they get this alkaloid called vincristine, and vincristine is from this, I think it's like a Madagascar periwinkle plant or something like that. I just
Uh-huh.
told Gary Breck about this, and Gary Breck just started laughing because it was like, he's like, where did you hear that? I didn't, so I heard that one time, but apparently it's true. But that compound, vincristine, they sell it for like $28,000 a gram. It's like
Yeah.
10 times the value of gold. And we get that from some of these foods. And so there's these alkaloids that we can get that are anti-cancerous, and they're very helpful for our body. But when we spray them with glyphosate, we don't get those alkaloids as much as we could
Mhm.
or at all. And so there's so much to food that if you understand that people always say like, well, like I don't want to be so restrictive and it's just fear mongering and it's all these things. It's like, well, okay, like I get that. But there's also some reality and truth here that we have to understand that our food is not what it used to be, even just 20, 30 years ago. It's changed.
Mhm.
Like we are getting food that's been mass produced and it's all about this profit that they can generate in feeding the masses. And if you don't have local farmers, you don't have people around you that you can get actual real food from that hasn't been tainted, we're just not getting nearly the benefits. That's where things like supplements come into play, but we also can still use your food and use it
Mhm.
wisely to get the healing properties that will help your body to heal and definitely not to get worse. Like that's what people are doing now is they're eating things that are making them worse, not even like helping them to heal for sure, but making them worse.
No, and I appreciate that. I know I actually like that tangent because it kind of helps to get back to where I was headed, which is, you know, with the meal plans and prep dish, I'm always talking about like, okay, this is, how we should eat. This is how to do it. And then I feel like that kind of helps to get back to the why of like, it's not just, oh, let's cut out gluten, but there's like a lot of reasons to be adding in these real whole foods and to go through the process of, preparing our foods and buying vegetables and, peeling them and cutting them and, you know,
Yeah.
figuring out ways to have that be this, part of our life and a part of our rhythm and not have it be a short-term fix, have it be a lifestyle. Um,
Yeah.
so could you talk a little bit about kind of that piece? And I'm also curious to hear how, so right before this interview, you mentioned that you've used the meal plans and how that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of worked. So,
Yeah. No, I mean, we have four kids. My wife, she's wonderful. Like she's very organized and she preps and all that stuff. But like I'm the opposite of that. Like if it wasn't for her, like before I met her, I was very unhealthy and had a lot of problems because like I didn't prepare. I was always responding to the
mhm,
situation. So I was therefore relying on convenience foods just to get by instead of like having a plan in place. And so, meal prep is so great because not only does it make it easier, but there are ingredients in meals that are tasty, like they're really good, like you enjoy them, and it
mhm,
rewards you for your effort, right? And so if you
yeah,
have these meals that aren't so good, and that's what people think, it's like I'm eating healthy, it's going to taste nasty. But my clients like follow like the recipes from your guys's business and your program, like they're like, wow, these are good, like these are actually really useful. And so I
mhm,
think it cuts out the component of convenience and actually making it easier to prep, and making sure that you're kind of combining things in a way that you're not doing extra work, like you're kind of efficiently working through it. And then from there, it's just the foods are nutritious and the foods are tasty and they're actually serving your body, especially if they're doing like an AIP program like that. I like that's where I start all my clients is like they start with that idea and then they go
mhm,
through it and they start to then have a process of elimination to figure out what serves them well. And people often don't understand, your immune system has memory to it. So like if you cut something out for 2 to 3 weeks, you'll start to actually see the result of not having it in your system. If you have a cheat day every week or something,
mhm,
you may actually feel better because you're just kind of always resetting that immune system response. But if you cut
yeah.
it out for long enough and follow like prep dish, like you'll actually notice real changes because you've been following it consistently long enough and your body's like, oh, like this is gone, I don't have to be attacking this anymore, I can kind of
Yeah.
let up a little bit. And so that's so important.
Yeah, and I really like because earlier, you mentioned, oh, it can seem so restrictive. And that's always one of my like goals to help people who are needing to go on, like an AIP or paleo or something, and to realize it's actually not restrictive. You just need to
Right.
focus on I'll literally like one time I wrote a spreadsheet of like, here's all the food you can eat. And there's like hundreds,
Yeah.
and it's
There's
like
so
what
many.
you're eating before that was restrictive. It was like, three or four foods and rotating through
Right.
them. So once you
Right.
realize like it's not restrictive, you just got to kind of change your mind and like look at what you can versus focusing on like the two or three things that you can't, because the list of what
Right.
you can have is actually usually longer, even if you are doing some sort of, elimination protocol or something that's still not usually, I mean, maybe in the very beginning, but usually it's
No,
pretty.
absolutely. I think when people realize the different combination of herbs and spices you can use and kind of how to combine that with certain proteins and different dishes, like it's a game changer. Because like you said, most people eat pretty bland meals and they're just
Mhm.
they're focusing on convenience only, and it really isn't, in my opinion, in the calculations of it, it's really not even more cost effective to eat that way either. Like you end up spending more
Yeah.
in the long run, and it also causes health problems. So it's like
Gosh,
it's a pretty
right.
easy
The
decision.
expenses that you're setting yourself up for in the long run, that's where the
Yeah,
real cost
for
is.
sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, cool.
Great. So as we're kind of getting towards the end of the interview here, what other things do you want listeners to know, or what things are you seeing that you want to talk about?
Well, I think the health has to start at the home. A lot of people make their homes into hotels, like it's just a pass through entity.
Hmm.
We're just kind of like we watch TV there, we get a takeout meal, we go there, and we never like really make our home, our house a home. And I think if you start with that mentality of with your spouse or whoever you're with, just kind of having that conversation of like, how can we make this a place of healing, a place of recovery, a place of enjoyment, a place of joy? The food is a big proponent of that, or a big component of that, and it really is a necessary component to where it can be a useful tool of healing. And I think people have this, uh, to use an analogy, like they have a bad financial strategy, like they don't invest well, and then they start seeing that like they have to work really hard just to kind of maintain a certain level of health. But if you can build these patterns and these processes in your home that are allowing for healing, it really is like a great financial strategy. Like you can start to heal while you're sleeping. You start to heal every single day. And I think people don't view it that way. Like they don't even think that healing is possible. They think that like, I can do healthy things here and there, but they're not like on a healing journey. Like they're not following a particular protocol or process. Like they're kind of just doing things that they find online, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but it's not like intentional enough to where they can actually see true results of healing. And there's just a big
Hmm.
difference there. I think you can't just be doing healthy stuff. You have to actually figure out what a healing process looks like for you. And each family and each household, each person is just a little bit different.
And then one thing I want to add, and then you can build on this because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we earlier you were touching on, the vitamin D levels and this and that. And so I do want to point out, I think a good place to start is, finding someone you can work with one-on-one. And I've talked about this on the podcast before of, getting lab work done and, not
Mm.
guessing, but testing. And, but do you have any other thoughts on, how to find a good practitioner, maybe looking for someone with that functional medicine background or what other?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's so there's options out there. With the first thing I would say, if you can't find somebody locally, so it depends on where you land. If you're so I'm a Christian, that to me is really a big deal. A lot of these alternative healthcare providers kind of get off in this new age stuff pretty quick. So I think finding somebody that you align with, that you agree with, that kind of knows why this matters to you is really important. And it's not just to look good in a dress, like it's to kind of go
Mhm.
beyond that. And they can tap into that. That's what I always tell my clients is like, we want to make sure that we understand like this is a biblical functional medicine perspective. Like these two are intertwined. And so that's where we start with. But if you can't find anybody locally, thankfully now because technology, and if you're not using pharmaceuticals and you're kind of doing more of this lifestyle stuff, like that's what I do. Like I help people around the world. I have virtual clients. And so we help them meet them where they are. And then depending on testing, what they have available to them, like if they're in a different country, a little bit more challenging. If they're in the United States or Canada, we have a lot more options for them to kind of say, like, this is what we can do to get testing done, whether it's mold or heavy metals or micronutrients or Dutch test or any of that stuff. Like we can facilitate all that through different options that we have. And so that's not a hard problem to solve. It just kind of gets more back to who do you want to work with? Who aligns with you well.
Great, thank you. And then before we wrap up, I want you to give a chance to, let us know how can people connect with you? What's the best place to find you?
Yeah, probably on my social. Instagram's probably the best place. But I'm kind of, you Google my name, you'll probably find me different options, but it's dr.austin.lake. I'm also have a ebook coming out that's probably will go to publishing, but I want to get into people's hands as fast as I can. And so I'm trying to do an ebook beforehand, but it's all these things that I just talked about and more.
Okay.
And it's called Holy Health. It's WHOOLLY. So it's kind of a play on words, but it's really just supposed to be a helpful guide to help guide specifically women, but also households through detoxing, meal plan stuff in terms of like kind of the AIP style of things, supplements, detoxing your home, kind of getting your home environment set up, menopause transition from perimenopause to postmenopause, and just a lot of these things I think that I've just learned over the last 6, 7 years that I just kind of put in a book, and I hope it's helpful to people. But that should be coming out here pretty soon.
Well, thank you so much. And if you haven't already, go look up Dr. Austin Lake. I appreciate all the work you've done to help promote Prep Dish over the years, and it was nice to
Mm-hmm.
finally meet you face to face. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, pleasure. I appreciate you and all the work you've done too.
A big thank you to Dr. Lake for coming on today. I really enjoyed our conversation. I feel like we could have kept going and taken that in a lot of different directions. Before we sign off, I do want to mention, so during the episode, he referenced a meal plan called AIP. This is short for autoimmune protocol. It's a little different than our subscription because this is a 5-week plan that you buy once versus kind of like new plans every month. But if you're interested in those, I will make sure they're linked below if you're watching YouTube and in the show notes if you're listening. But you can go to prepdish.com/shop and you should be able to find the AIP plans. If you're wanting to just try out our, regular subscription of meal plans sent to your inbox every week, you can go to prepdish.com/mpm, and that's where we have a 2-week free trial. So for 14 days, you can try it out. We do have a paleo, a gluten-free, super fast, which is just, family-friendly, healthy meals, low-carb options. So if you do want to try that out, it's prepdish.com/mpm for that trial. That is all I have for this week. I'll be back again next Monday with another episode.